Welcome back to Reddit Updates Us. Let's get into today's saga. This one is from r/legal advice. Tree service cut down trees without my permission. 3 weeks ago I asked a tree service if they could provide a quote to cut down a few small trees in my backyard, along with a much larger tree. I never set a date, never agreed to any work, just met with them for 5 minutes to point out the trees and then asked them to leave a quote in my mailbox and I would call them if we decided to use them. Get home. See a quote. Seems a little high, so I'm getting a few other quotes. Never contact them, never hear back from them. Come home this past Monday early from work, and I see several large trucks and equipment from the tree company in front of my house. I look into my backyard from my truck window and see them cutting away. I go running down the side yard yelling at them to stop and asking what the hell they're doing. Job foreman, not the same person I spoke to before, says they're doing what I told them. I tell him I never agreed to any services, and my wife had even decided against cutting some of the pines down because she liked the wooded appearance it gave our lot. I tell him to immediately stop, and one of their guys goes running to the backyard yelling for everyone to stop. Go inside, grab the quote, show him how it wasn't signed. He gets the owner, person I spoke with before, on the phone and I immediately ask why he came out to my home and did work I never agreed to him doing. Emphasize that all I asked for was a quote. He seems flustered, says he doesn't know how it happened, he's really sorry. This cycle repeats for about 10 minutes on how this has never happened and he doesn't know why he put me down if I didn't sign anything or agree to it and on and on and on, etc. Conversation ends with his crew cleaning up, leaving, and him agreeing to meet us at our home that evening to work it out. Wife comes home and cries for a good bit because now we can see clear back to the large road behind us, and about half of the pine trees she loved are gone. For reference, there were about 12 total and they were each 12 to 18 years old, about 30 to 45 feet tall. Guy arrives. Initially tries to make it sound like it's on both of us that it happened as some kind of miscommunication and that I must have verbally agreed to it. I then make it clear that it's 100% on them, and they need to fix it. To make matters worse, they just toppled the trees off onto the hill behind my fence, which runs down towards a public access hiking trail. I don't own the land that the trees are now on, and it's illegal for me to dump them there, not to mention the liability if the tree debris were to slide down and hit a hiker on the trail. My wife and I only had about 30 minutes before he showed up from the time she got off work, so we didn't have a lot of time to figure out a solution. What we came to agreement on verbally, and loosely, is that we pay nothing, he cleans up the cut down trees, and he plants a new row of fast-growing evergreens like my wife loved. He then leaves and says he'll call to set a date, which he set for the end of this next week, and to let him know which evergreens we want. I tell him we may need something else too, or to do something different once we have more time to think it over. However, the more my wife and I think about it, the more we feel like this isn't a fair shake. It'll take another 10 to 12 years for us to get even part of the wooded appearance back that our lot had before, and that was one of the primary reasons we bought the house. As a final note, all of this was caught on the security system on my house, and I recorded the conversation we had with the owner when he arrived. My questions are this. Is this a fair trade? What are our rights or what we're owed legally? Are these trees or their aesthetic appearance to us worth anything legally? Should I consult an attorney, and if so, what kind of an attorney do I call? Should I cancel the cleanup appointment we have with the company until I consult an attorney? I'm not trying to make this a payday, I just want to make sure they do what's right by us, and it especially has me riled up how much this upset my wife emotionally. She's cried a few times since then when she's looked at the backyard. It was always her dream to live on a wooded lot like her parents did, to the point of it being a veto issue when we were looking for a house, so it meant a lot to her. Thanks in advance for any advice you can give. And now on to the updates. Wow. I was not expecting this kind of response, and I greatly appreciate the multiple PMs and public responses I've received regarding this topic. I've made a few replies below but figured it would be easier to give a small update here. I spoke with my attorney friend today. He hasn't handled these cases before, and had to research up on the triple damages in GA law dating back from the 1800s apparently. I am not bound to any type of verbal agreement, as I intentionally left it open to further consideration, and the tree service was also negotiating from a position that was disadvantageous to me with lesser knowledge on the topic of discussion. He has advised that I get an arborist involved, contact my local town council to have a land survey done to verify the trees as being mine, and also to give certification that the removal wasn't permitted and the disposal into their property by the tree company was without their permission. The arborist should be able to give a fair market value on the cut down trees, and should also be able to recommend a tree service specifically meant to transplant adult trees and get a quote from them for that cost. All of this should go through their CGL insurance. They are a large company apparently, and he can assist with an INTL demand letter to see if they would just settle in either just cash or cash on the cut tree values plus agreement to pay directly for the tree service of my choosing to put back similar trees plus clear out the debris. If they push back, he says I definitely have a case and an easy one at that. He knows someone who specifically handles tree tort law in GA, and would hand over my case to them at that point if needed. At this point, I'm going to archive this post and print out all the responses and then probably delete for now per my attorney's request. Already sent the moderators a request that they lock the thread. I promise I'll be back with an update once I get a resolution, hopefully soon. Thanks again. Reddit is helpful again, as always. Now, the next update. In the interest of keeping Tree Week going, I've decided to give a small update to this situation. I had an arborist come out and do an evaluation. Out of 12 pines on the lot, 7 had been removed and another species of tree had been damaged, broken in half, by the felling of the pines. They were all 40 feet or larger, and the other species was even larger and worth more than the rest combined. I won't say the exact value here, but it was indeed substantial. As well, I had a reforestation service come out that was recommended by the arborist. Unfortunately, due to the steep embankment, it is simply not possible to replant 40 feet tall pines. They would never take and it would be nigh impossible to accomplish regardless. The largest that would have the highest success of implantation would be 8 to 10 feet tall, and would take 4 to 5 years after to regain the privacy from the road and development behind us that we had before. Regardless, it was still an extremely high cost to both replant the new trees as well as clear the debris from the old trees off of the hillside. My attorney sent a letter to the tree company with a demand for triple damages as well as the costs of reforestation. I received a deluge of calls and voicemails from the owner, which I ignored and sent VM copies to my attorney. I've also seen them on the motion sensor for my cameras driving past my house on multiple occasions, which I let my attorney know about. I let my neighbors know to keep an eye out, and if they see the service at my home while I'm gone to immediately call the police. My attorney had a discussion with them in which the owners said they were going to turn it over to insurance and let them figure it out. They said we had a verbal contract to do work, which I deny, and I have an unsigned quote and video footage showing I left before he even put the quote in my mailbox. I also have the voice recordings with one of the owners explicitly stating their fault in the matter. I'll post another update once we hear back from his insurance. Now, on to the final update. So after getting the insurance claim filed, we met with the adjuster, who admitted they were liable but thought our claim amount was ridiculous and unfounded. My attorney then showed her the exact law regarding treble damages and market value not being related to the cord value, which she apparently was ignorant of, and she immediately started backtracking and saying they weren't going to accept liability and were going to argue that there was indeed a verbal contract in place and that's why they did the work. My attorney rightfully told them he would play the recording of our meeting in court, recordings of my conversations with the owner, and had mountains of evidence to support there not being a contract, generally ripping her a new one the whole time. She left and we didn't hear anything for a while, and they ignored the time limit on our demand, which was reasonable at 3x the arborist estimate of $20,000, so $60,000 total. We filed suit, along with a letter detailing our concern about the large trees left behind on the embankment, how they might end up sliding down into the protected river and trail below, and that we would hold them liable for these additional damages if they should continue to ignore our demand and deny liability in bad faith. It got escalated to a new adjuster who contacted us to basically say we'd see them in court. While waiting on this to happen, discovery is a pain. My worst fears came true. Due to heavy rains, the trees that had been cut down and left on the hill leading down to the river pulled loose and slid down to the trail and river. They dragged a ton of other plant debris with them, caused the embankment to partially collapse/destabilize, and left the trail completely blocked with a large blockage on the flow of the river below too from all of the debris that fell into it. The collapsing embankment also pulled a portion of my backyard with it and most of my rear fence line that was on it, along with causing 4 other pine trees and our beautiful weeping willow to either topple or partially uproot with the soil. The river is also the primary water source for our small town, which becomes relevant soon after. Lucky for me, no one was on the trail and so no injuries were involved. Even luckier for me, my attorney was also the firm for the local city and had been keeping them informed since the trees were felled onto their property and how we were trying to get it resolved so they wouldn't come after me. Thankfully, they had been very understanding and helpful, even sending out their in-house arborist and engineer to evaluate. The city was angry when the river became blocked, called out a major engineering firm, and because of my attorney's relationship with them, was nice enough to include the damages to my yard, fence, and trees in their overall assessment of damages, since rebuilding the embankment and doing cleanup was impossible without also building back up my yard too. My new trees being planted would also help with the long-term stabilization of the new embankment. As well, the reconstruction/stabilization of the embankment, dredging of the river, and clearing of the trail all had to happen immediately because of the river being the local water source. All told, the engineering firm's assessment was well over $1.2 million to complete all the necessary work on an emergency need timetable. This of course didn't include any resulting damages from the diminished water source, having to issue a boil water order, city incurred costs, etc. They would now have to build a series of long-term retainer walls to stabilize what had been before a naturally occurring embankment and completely dredge a protected water source. They began work immediately, and in return for including my yard reconstruction in their work, I allowed them full access rights through my property as much as they needed, with the condition that they would include repairing any sod damage in their assessment. They began work immediately, and it was a flurry of activity. We stayed in a nearby hotel because they worked into the night with bright lights and loud, heavy equipment, and I had to board my dogs for 2 weeks while it was going on since they couldn't be in the backyard anymore. After almost 4 weeks the work was done, and our yard actually looked even better than before. All total, my case for incurred costs alone was well over $175,000, not including punitive damages, including repayment to the city for the work they had to perform on my property, including resodding and grading most of my yard from the equipment use. I wasn't told exactly what the city's claim for subrogation was, but it was well into the $1.5 million range according to my attorney. Our attorney did some sort of paperwork, forgive my legal ignorance, to ask for a speedy court date due to the circumstances after sending all of the updated damages to the insurance company. The next day after they received our certified letter, and I assume my attorney's court request, we received a call from someone in the office of the president for the insurance company. After ignoring us for months, they were now begging us to settle out of court, presumably to avoid punitive damages. After negotiating for roughly 2 weeks, we settled on just over $295,000 plus attorney costs. Out of that, after paying what we owed for the city to do their part of the work, reimbursing for out-of-pocket costs, and our attorney getting their share, we ended up with a good amount. While it wasn't quite $100,000, it was pretty close to it, so we were definitely happy with the outcome. As for the city, they were essentially maxing out what was left of the policy. It was a $2 million policy, and then going after the owner and his company for the remaining damages, as well as the state going after their licensing and levying fines against them. As of last month, his company disappeared from my local Google pages and his number no longer works, which I presume means that he went out of business. Essentially, what could have been a fair and minor insurance payout turned into the owner losing his company, I presume, us having a fully reconstructed backyard, new trees, new fencing, new sod, an ample savings account, and with a nice set of retainer walls and private stairs leading down to the river. And that's it for today's tale. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. See you next time on Reddit Updates Us.